The precinct was buzzing like any normal morning. Phones rang, radios crackled, and the hum of fluorescent lights filled the space. Officers shuffled papers, shared jokes, and occasionally barked commands across desks. And then Keanu Reeves walked in. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no dramatics, just a calm man moving with quiet purpose. At first, nobody noticed him. Just another civilian, or so it seemed. But one young officer did. A cocky, overconfident kid who thought his uniform gave him the right to dominate everyone in the room. He spotted Keanu near the counter and immediately started laughing, loud and sharp. "Look at this guy," he shouted. "What are you gonna do, old man? Teach me a lesson." Heads turned. Some officers chuckled. Others paused, sensing the tension but unsure how to intervene. Keanu didn't flinch, didn't smile sarcastically, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes calm, observing. The officer stepped closer, leaning in just a little too much, smirking. "You're in my space now. You better behave." Keanu's voice was quiet but carried a subtle authority. "I'm here to handle my business. No disruption intended." The officer laughed again, louder this time, drawing a few more amused glances. "Business? You look like you belong in a movie, not in my precinct. Tell me, where you hiding?" The people around them froze. The tension was thick, almost visible in the air. Some officers whispered to each other, unsure if they should step in. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He simply tilted his head slightly, watching. Patient, calculating, calm. And that's when the young cop decided to escalate, grinning maliciously, mocking every measured movement Keanu made, leaning in closer, invading personal space, clearly enjoying the show. "Come on, Grandpa," the officer taunted. "You think your calm act impresses anyone here?" That was the moment the room collectively paused. Phones were subtly lifted. The hum of activity stopped. Even the receptionist stopped typing mid-sentence. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen. And in that pause, Keanu's subtle smirk appeared. Not threatening, not arrogant, just enough to hint that this confrontation was far from ordinary, because the officer had no idea who he was really dealing with. And what came next would change everything, instantly. The young officer's laughter echoed through the precinct, bouncing off the walls. Each chuckle felt heavier than the last, like he was stacking invisible bricks of arrogance around himself. To him, this was just another power play, a chance to humiliate someone who didn't immediately bow to authority. Keanu Reeves didn't flinch. He didn't even raise an eyebrow. He simply observed. The hum of the precinct, the slight tremor in the officer's hands, the way his colleagues avoided eye contact, all of it registered like a quiet pulse beneath the chaos. Other officers tried to laugh along, some awkwardly, others pretending to be entertained. But the tension was palpable. Even the receptionist, usually quick with a joke or a quip, sat frozen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The room felt suddenly smaller, suffused with anticipation. The cocky officer stepped closer. "Seriously," he sneered. "What's your deal? You think standing there quietly makes you impressive?" Keanu's voice was calm but precise, carrying an underlying weight. "I'm simply observing. That's all." The officer scoffed and leaned even closer, invading Keanu's personal space. He smelled of coffee and cologne, the kind of mix that officers think exudes authority. "Observing? Or calculating?" he mocked. "Maybe you're sizing me up for your next stunt? Because that's all you actors ever do, right?" A few officers exchanged nervous glances. They could see the young man's ego inflating with every word, and they knew, though they didn't say it, that he was walking a dangerous line. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He let the words hang, his silence amplifying the arrogance in the room. But his eyes, calm, measured, and unflinching, gave the faintest hint that he wasn't an ordinary man, that he was assessing everything. The officer's stance, the slight imbalance in his posture, the tension in his grip. The officer noticed the quiet, and in his mind, it became a challenge. "Come on, talk," he barked, slamming his palm against the counter. "What are you thinking? Trying to psych me out?" Keanu leaned slightly forward, voice barely above the ambient hum of the precinct. "I'm thinking," he said, That you don't know the people you underestimate. The officer froze for a split second. Then laughter. Don't know me? Kid, I've seen all kinds. You think you're special. Every word the officer spoke made him bolder, more reckless. His body language screamed confidence. Yet beneath it, there was a subtle crack, a fleeting uncertainty he didn't even recognize. Keanu's presence was magnetic, calm, controlled, unshakable. It was a stark contrast to the officer's loud, brash energy. And though no one said it out loud, everyone in the room sensed the imbalance. The officer, fueled by ego, decided to push further. He moved closer, invading Keanu's personal space again, smirking as though he were about to deliver the punchline of the day. But Keanu remained composed. One slight tilt of his head, a measured pause, a calm stare, small gestures that carried far more power than the officer could comprehend. Because the officer didn't know yet, this wasn't just a quiet actor in a precinct. This was a man trained in ways that would make even the most aggressive authority pause. And at that very moment, tension reached its tipping point. Everyone in the room could feel it. The air thickened, breath slowed, and the unspoken question hung in the space between them. How far can arrogance go before it meets consequences? Keanu didn't move. He didn't need to. The calm in his presence said more than words ever could. And the next moment, when the doors opened, would turn the power dynamic on its head forever. The young officer's smirk grew wider. He was convinced he was untouchable, that his uniform, his rank, and his audacity made him the alpha in the room. Every word, every shove, every mocking glance reinforced the illusion of power he had built around himself. Come on, he sneered, leaning in just a little too close to Keanu Reeves. You're staring too much. What are you thinking? That your calm face is going to scare me? Newsflash, old man, it's not. The precinct fell into an awkward silence. Phones hovered, hands trembled, and whispers rippled across the room. Officers who normally would have laughed or joined in stared, sensing that the line had been crossed. Even the receptionist, usually quick to joke, froze mid-typing, eyes wide. Keanu remained calm. Not a muscle betrayed anger. Not a word escaped in retaliation. His hands rested lightly at his sides, his posture perfect, his breathing controlled. But his eyes, sharp, measured, and piercing, tracked every micro-movement of the officer. He was listening to the rhythm of aggression, calculating how it could be deflected, absorbed, or neutralized. You're awfully quiet, the officer mocked, leaning even closer. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue. Keanu's lips barely moved, but his words landed like a stone in water. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. You might want to try it. The officer laughed, sharp and cruel, taking a step closer. I don't need lessons from someone who looks like he's lost in a costume department. Maybe I should remind you whose floor this is. And then he did. He shoved Keanu lightly, just enough to be intimidating, thinking it would break the man's composure. A few officers flinched. Some gasped quietly. The tension escalated in seconds. But Keanu didn't stumble. He absorbed the shove, adjusting his balance effortlessly, his calm almost unnerving. One subtle shift of his weight, one micro-step to the side, and the officer would have been off balance himself. But Keanu didn't act. He didn't need to. See? The officer taunted, chest rising. You're pretending to be calm, but I can see it in your eyes. You're nervous. Keanu's voice was quiet, but each word cut sharply. Arrogance blinds people, and right now you're the blind one. The officer froze for a heartbeat, more from the weight of the words than their volume. Then he laughed again, louder this time, a forced laugh meant to regain control. He reached out, attempting to push Keanu again, and that's when the first ripple of unease passed through the room. Some officers leaned back, instinctively sensing that this was no ordinary civilian confrontation. Others whispered to each other, eyes darting nervously. The balance had shifted slightly, just enough for the tension to taste like danger. The officer, fueled by ego and oblivious to the signs, crossed the invisible line. He mocked Keanu's posture, his silence, even his calm expression, laughing in a way meant to humiliate, but that only intensified the growing storm. Keanu finally spoke again, calm and deliberate. You're playing a game you can't win. Not because of me, but because of the choices you've already made. The officer stiffened, anger mixing with confusion. The room's energy shifted. Phones were lifted cautiously. Some onlookers instinctively moved closer, curiosity and fear mingling in the same breath. Then, as if the universe itself had a perfect sense of timing, the precinct doors swung open. The sound echoed, louder than it should have. A presence entered, a commanding figure in tactical gear, exuding authority that demanded attention. The cop turned. The arrogance drained instantly. The grin faded. His ego, which had seemed so solid moments ago, cracked under the weight of recognition and anticipation. Keanu's calm eyes flicked toward the newcomer. A subtle nod. That was all it took. And in that moment, the room understood that the conflict had only just begun, and that the scales of power were about to tip violently. The precinct doors swung open with a quiet authority that immediately cut through the tension like a blade. Every head in the room turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim for a moment, as if acknowledging the gravity of the arrival. Standing in the doorway was a woman whose presence alone demanded attention. Not flashy, not loud, but precise, sharp, and controlled. Tactical gear hugged her frame, insignias glinting subtly under the fluorescent lights. Her posture was impeccable, military-trained, every movement fluid, deliberate. The air around her carried a mix of command and calm, a force that was felt, not announced. The young officer, who had been strutting just moments ago, froze. His smirk faltered. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but now, instead of confidence, it carried fear. That arrogance, which had seemed unshakable, cracked under the weight of recognition, or perhaps intuition. He instinctively reached for his radio, but his hand shook. Keanu Reeves, still calm as ever, allowed a slight nod toward the woman. No words, just acknowledgement. In that gesture, the room could feel an unspoken understanding. She was here for him, and nothing the officer had done moments ago would matter. The woman stepped forward, her boots clicking softly against the floor. Every officer in the room instinctively straightened, even the ones who had previously been smirking or whispering. The sheer presence of this elite figure commanded obedience, without a single raised voice. The young cop's eyes darted from her to Keanu. "Mom," he stammered, a weak attempt to mask the panic creeping up his spine. "Yes," she said simply, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "I hear my son has been embarrassing someone today." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Laughter died on the officer's lips. The color drained from his face. He tried to regain control, opening his mouth, but no words came. Keanu's calm eyes met hers for a brief moment. A subtle nod, barely perceptible, confirmed what everyone in the room was beginning to understand. The tide had turned. The calm observer, who had let arrogance and cruelty slide for moments, had quietly orchestrated the moment when justice would arrive. The officer's mother moved closer, scanning the room with precise, trained eyes. Every detail, the cop's posture, his hands, his reaction to Keanu, was noted and cataloged silently. She didn't shout. She didn't point. Yet her authority filled the space completely. "Officer," she said finally, her tone calm but cutting, "do you understand the situation you've created?" The young man swallowed hard. I was just, she interrupted, her voice steady and measured. "You thought it was funny to humiliate a civilian. You thought no one would notice. You were wrong. Very wrong." The room remained utterly silent, as if the air itself held its breath. Phones hovered, witnesses froze, and even Keanu stood still, letting the moment fully play out. The woman's eyes locked on her son. "You were taught to protect and respect, not to abuse power, and certainly not to mock someone who doesn't deserve it." The officer's knees wobbled slightly. The confidence that had carried him moments ago utterly evaporated. He tried to straighten, but his hands twitched nervously, and the slight tremor betrayed him. Keanu took a single step forward. His voice remained calm, measured, almost a whisper. Sometimes, the lesson needs to arrive in person. The woman's lips twitched slightly, a hint of acknowledgement for the timing. Together, silently, they presented an unshakable front. Arrogance and cruelty had no foothold here. The cop's colleagues in the precinct watched, awestruck. Some whispered among themselves, "Who is she?" Others muttered, "I wouldn't cross her in a million years." The officer attempted one last act of bravado, puffing his chest out. I didn't know." His mother raised a single finger, stopping him. "Not knowing is no excuse. And you are about to learn exactly why respect matters, whether you see it or not." Keanu nodded once, subtly, as if confirming that the moment of public humiliation had reached its peak. And then the officer realized fully. The scales had tipped completely. The arrogance that had fueled his mockery moments ago was now meaningless. He was no longer in control. Not here. Not now. The room waited, tense, every eye fixed on the scene. The young officer's world had shifted in an instant, and the lesson he had ignored for too long was about to be delivered, calmly, decisively, and with perfect precision. The young officer's bravado evaporated in the presence of the woman who had just entered. Every step she took toward him radiated authority, experience, and a calm strength that made the air itself tense. The entire precinct seemed to lean in, waiting for what would happen next. Keanu Reeves remained calm, his posture relaxed, his eyes watching carefully. He didn't need to act. The situation had already shifted in his favor. But the arrival of the Special Ops veteran was the signal for the reckoning to begin. The woman stopped just a few feet from her son. "Do you understand why we're here?" she asked, her voice calm, cutting through the tension like a knife. I was just following protocol," the officer stammered, sweat forming on his brow. "Protocol," she repeated, eyebrows slightly raised. "What you did was nothing to do with protocol. It was arrogance, disrespect, and a complete abuse of authority. Do you realize how serious this is?" The officer opened his mouth, but no words came. He could feel every eye in the room on him. The tension was suffocating, the silence oppressive. Even the other officers, who had been chuckling moments ago, were frozen, witnessing the full weight of consequences. Keanu's calm voice finally broke the silence, measured, low, and controlled. "Sometimes, people think power comes from fear or intimidation. It doesn't. It comes from respect. And right now, respect is what you lack." The officer's knees buckled slightly. His hands fidgeted. He had mocked Keanu seconds ago, not realizing that patience and observation often hold more power than arrogance. The woman took one step closer, her presence dominant yet composed. "You were taught to protect people, to uphold justice, and to maintain order, not to humiliate or intimidate. And yet here you are, failing at every one of those principles. Today, you are about to learn the real meaning of accountability." The officer's colleagues began whispering among themselves. Some tried to stifle laughter at the obvious karma unfolding. Others simply stared wide-eyed as the arrogance that had dominated the room just minutes ago crumbled completely. Keanu nodded once, subtly, acknowledging the timing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't need to. The combined presence of experience, authority, and calm decisiveness did all the work. The woman's gaze locked onto her son, unblinking, assessing every micro-expression. "Your actions were reckless. You humiliated a civilian in a space that demands professionalism. Your behavior reflects poorly on everyone who has trained and trusted you." And now, she gestured to two plainclothes officers who had been standing quietly at the side. "You are being relieved of duty immediately and escorted for disciplinary review. This is your first and last warning." The officer's jaw dropped. "Wait, I didn't." Keanu interrupted softly, but firmly. "Not knowing doesn't excuse the harm you've caused, and arrogance doesn't protect you from accountability." The officer's mother stepped even closer. The motion was small, almost casual, but in it was the power of years of tactical training and authority. She didn't need to touch him. Her presence alone demanded submission. The young cop's attempts to speak again were cut short by the quiet, authoritative voice of the mother. "Apologies will not erase this, but acknowledgement is the first step. You will face consequences, and you will learn humility, whether willingly or not." As the two plainclothes officers gently guided him away, the officer's colleagues watched silently. Some were relieved, some were ashamed, realizing how close they had been to supporting the wrong behavior. and some simply stared in awe at the display of power that had required no violence, only precise timing, authority, and calm execution. Keanu straightened, shoulders relaxed. He glanced at the woman, who gave a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that the situation was resolved. Then he turned and walked calmly toward the exit. Each step was measured, each movement deliberate, exuding control without aggression. The crowd in the precinct whispered. Phones were lowered. The lesson was clear. Power without respect is hollow, and arrogance has a way of catching up to those who wield it thoughtlessly. Even the officer, escorted away, knew that this was a moment that would haunt him. His attempt to assert dominance had failed spectacularly, and the lesson was indelibly written in the eyes of everyone present. Keanu didn't look back. He didn't need to. The balance had been restored, karma delivered, and the quiet lesson of humility and restraint had left its mark. And in that moment, everyone realized one truth. True authority is not loud. It doesn't need intimidation. It's calm, precise, and undeniable. The precinct was quieter now, but the energy remained tense. The echo of the confrontation lingered in every corner, a reminder that authority could be wielded wisely, or abused recklessly. Keanu Reeves walked calmly through the precinct, his movements deliberate, measured. Officers parted instinctively as he passed, some nodding with respect, others frozen in awe. He didn't acknowledge anyone with words. His presence alone was enough to command attention. The young officer, escorted by plainclothes colleagues, sat in a small office, shoulders slumped, head lowered. The adrenaline that had fueled his arrogance minutes ago had evaporated, replaced with the heavy weight of realization. He understood fully now. Authority is meaningless without humility, and intimidation is nothing compared to calm competence. Outside the office, his mother, the special ops veteran, remained a silent sentinel. She didn't lecture him further. There was no need. The moment had delivered its lesson. He didn't have to hear the words repeated. The humiliation, the fear, the shift in power, it was indelible. Meanwhile, Keanu was approached by the precinct supervisor, a middle-aged officer with years of experience, but no prior connection to the unfolding drama. "Sir, thank you," the supervisor said quietly, almost reverently. I don't even know how to describe what just happened." Keanu's voice was calm, measured, a soft counterpoint to the tension still hanging in the room. "Sometimes, people need to see the consequences of their actions directly. That's all." The supervisor nodded, understanding. "It's clear now. Respect and authority are not the same." Keanu offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, and continued walking. He didn't need to linger. His role in the moment was complete. The lesson had been delivered without unnecessary conflict, without escalation. The young officer's colleagues began to murmur among themselves, sharing their observations. Some admitted shame for not intervening sooner. Others expressed awe at the restraint Keanu had shown. Even the senior officers who had been skeptical realized that what they had witnessed was rare. Authority exercised perfectly, humility maintained under pressure, and consequences delivered without violence. Back in the officer's mother finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "This is your first and last warning. You'll face disciplinary measures and additional training, but more importantly, you will remember this lesson. The choices you make with power define the person you become." The young officer swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was barely audible, stripped of arrogance, stripped of bravado. Keanu had already reached the exit, but the impact of his presence lingered. Other officers approached him quietly, asking questions, seeking advice, wanting to understand the mindset required to maintain such composure in the face of provocation. He answered briefly, carefully, always emphasizing calm observation over reaction, patience over aggression, and restraint over dominance. By the time he left the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Laughter had returned in some corners, but it was tempered by reflection. Phones went back to buzzing, papers shuffled, and radios crackled, but a subtle sense of respect had been restored. Outside, Keanu paused briefly. The city moved around him, indifferent to the lesson that had just been delivered within four walls. Yet for those present, the lesson was permanent. Arrogance crumbles quickly when confronted by calm, experience, and measured authority. The young officer would not forget. The colleagues who had witnessed the event would carry it with them. And even the supervisor, seasoned and jaded, would recount the story quietly, emphasizing the power of calm, control, and patience. Keanu stepped into the sunlight streaming through the precinct's doors, unhurried, unaffected by attention or recognition. The lesson had been delivered, karma executed, and respect quietly restored. And in the back of the room, the officer's mother remained, standing tall, a silent reminder. Authority without integrity is meaningless, and humility often carries the greatest power of all. The precinct had returned to its normal rhythm, but the echoes of what had just occurred lingered, like a quiet storm. Papers shuffled, phones buzzed, radios crackled, but beneath the ordinary noises, an unspoken lesson hung heavy in the air. The young officer sat alone in the back office, replaying the events over and over in his mind. Every word, every gesture, every pause by Keanu Reeves, and every measured step his mother had taken, was etched into his memory. The arrogance that had fueled him moments ago now seemed small, almost laughable, in the face of the quiet power he had witnessed. Humility, restraint, respect, these were not abstract concepts anymore. They were lessons delivered in real time, embodied in the calm demeanor of a man who didn't need to shout to command attention, and in the presence of a veteran who required no threats to enforce accountability. Keanu, meanwhile, had left the building quietly, his presence fading into the city streets. No applause, no cameras, no fanfare, and yet his impact was undeniable. Officers who had watched him were still processing, still whispering to one another about the power of composure and patience. One by one, officers approached the young man to discuss what had happened. Not to lecture, but to reflect. He listened silently, understanding that the real lesson was internal, personal. Respect and authority were not earned through intimidation or ego. They were demonstrated through integrity, restraint, and thoughtful action. Outside, Keanu paused in the sunlight for a moment, feeling the world move around him. To anyone passing by, he was just another man walking through the city. But for those inside the precinct, he had been a catalyst for change. He had demonstrated that power is most effective when it is quiet, deliberate, and grounded in morality. The officer's mother remained behind, standing tall, a symbol of discipline and experience. She had not needed to raise her voice or make threats. Her authority was inherent, born of years of training and reinforced by her calm decisiveness. And in that moment, the young officer realized the most important truth. Leadership is not about showing strength. It's about using it responsibly. Weeks later, the story had faded from the headlines. Phones buzzed with new news, and life moved on. But the lessons remained. The young officer approached his work with a new mindset. Colleagues noticed the change. Respect was no longer something he demanded. It was something he earned through action and attitude. Keanu never returned to the precinct, and no one outside knew the story in its full depth. But for those who witnessed it, the impact was profound. They had seen arrogance humbled, power balanced, and respect restored. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all. The world may not always notice acts of patience, restraint, and integrity. Yet their effect ripples far beyond the immediate moment, shaping choices, behavior, and character in ways that no loud gesture ever could. As Keanu walked into the city, blending into the crowd, one truth remained. True strength lies not in intimidation, not in aggression, but in calm, measured action, guided by respect and humility. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons are the ones delivered quietly, leaving the recipients forever changed, even when no one else is watching.